Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 14 of SuperSports, the review series of course for, as the name implies, the vehicles which are SuperSports class. It's a slightly vague but definitely discernible class of vehicle which sits somewhere between sports cars and supercars, and this car is pretty much the definition of a supersports car. It is Audi's R8, specifically the original R8 V8 version. Now, to give you some idea of what kind of impression this car made when it was released, this car was released at around a very similar time to the Nissan GT-R of the R35 generation. People had been waiting for an R35 for literally years. But it didn't overshadow this Audi. Despite being released to some of the most intense competition that this car could have possibly had, it managed to steal spotlight from the GT-R. Not necessarily all of the spotlight, but the R8 captured people's attention. It was a German sports car, or super sports car, that wasn't German in its attitude. It wasn't the traditionally dull and slightly business-like approach to performance. It had the engineering and technical prowess that you'd expect and want from a German car, but it also had flair, both in its design and in its driving ability and performance, that is relatively uncommon for German sports cars. They tend to be very focused on being efficient rather than characterful and fun. Now, there are some exceptions, but that's just as a general rule, of course. So the fact that this car managed to hold its own, even against the historical and cultural importance of the R35 generation GT-R, kind of gives you an indication of just how good this car must be in real life. And it is, of course, a very highly selling car in real life. It's hugely popular. Now, there is, of course, the V10 version, of course, and numerous racing versions and special editions like the GT, the convertible, etc. But this version in particular is just the original V8 FSI Quattro. And I actually like this version more than any of the others that came after it. In fact, I featured it in my top 10 best looking cars on Gran Turismo 6 list. So what does it have to offer? Because most people by far go for the V10 version. It's the obvious choice. It's closer to what is arguably its main rival and the car which it shares many of its technological and mechanical parts with, the Lamborghini Gallardo, and it's closer to being a full-on supercar than the V8 version is. So what does the V8 have to offer compared to the very hefty competition that the V10 provides? Well, it does have a much smaller engine. It's a litre smaller in capacity. It's a 4.2 litre V8, as we mentioned before, and it's all-wheel drive, fairly obviously, as the Quattro name implies. It's mid-engined, of course, and it actually has a very impressive spec when fully tuned. 959 horsepower is nothing to be sniffed at. Now, that's not as much as the V10, but that's still more than enough to make it an extremely rapid machine. Now, the torque is not quite as high as you might expect. It sits at 588 pound-feet. I would have personally expected more than that. But it has more of a high revving kind of engine. Most of its peak power and torque come in at around 8,000 to 9,000 RPM. So it likes to be worked. It's not a lazy engine by any means. The car also manages to be surprisingly lightweight. Now, it's no featherweight, but despite having a luxurious interior, good build quality, and all-wheel drive, it still only weighs 1,248 kilos with the full weight loss package, which is lighter, incidentally, than the V10 version. And thanks to the massive power output that it has, combined with that very modest weight, it has a really decent power-to-weight ratio per tonne of 768, which is, when fully tuned, in supercar territory, and in a straight line. It can give supercars a fantastic run for their money, Again, as I said, most people tend to go for the V10 version for straight line performance. It has over 1100 horsepower, etc. But this car is a seriously quick machine. The top speed is around 280 with very minimal tuning. Off the line, it can keep up with pretty much anything thanks to the all-wheel drive and huge power. And around the track, I would actually say it has superior handling to the V10 version. The handling has an amount of grip which you would expect from a mid-engined all-wheel drive car, but at the same time it has a very playful attitude. You can get the tail out on this car very easily. And that's good, because that means that not only can it be potentially fast and competitive, but you can also actually have fun with it. Whereas the Nissan GT-R, as brilliant as it is a much more focused machine. It's more about achievement than enjoyment. Whereas the R8 strikes, I would say, is a pretty good balance between the two. And that's coming from someone who isn't really an Audi fan. I respect them, but they're not really on my top 10 in any list. This car, though, is probably my favourite Audi in the game. It's a brilliant vehicle all round, and it's fun. Many cars have one or the other, but struggle to have both. This car legitimately has both, and for 166,000 credits, it's actually pretty well priced as well. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.